Here are a few marijuana statistics. 60% of high school seniors view marijuana use as unharmful. 23% of high school seniors have smoked marijuana recently. And 48.3% of all drug arrests are for marijuana possession, with Maryland having the highest arrest rates. So what does this all mean? We talked to several groups to find the answers. One of them was the Marijuana Policy Project, a lobbying group responsible for much of the legislation in Colorado and Washington. We also sat down with Montgomery Police Chief Manger, the Montgomery County State's Attorney, John McCarthy, and we also spoke to Dr. DuPont, an addiction specialist and the president for the Institute of Behavior and Health. When it comes to marijuana legalization, arguments fall on both sides of the scale. As we've seen in Colorado, the financial benefits have proven to be substantial, yet public health has become a growing concern. For this video, we aim to focus on one aspect of this heated debate. This is the highs and lows, teens and marijuana legalization.
Now, personally, I think as a doctor, it's important for kids not to use any of those substances. I think that same way about my own kids when they were growing up and about my grandkids now. And I let them all know what I think about that. But there's differences of opinion about that, and there are some pretty bad consequences for kids who use the drugs, including automobile accidents and dropping out of school, and all kinds of bad things happen. But there's a tolerance in the United States for letting kids make their own decisions, including bad ones.
It's been an evolving process. I became interested when I was a college student, just informally, not considering it as a career path at all. But what I found really compelling was the science that shows that marijuana is actually safer than alcohol for both the individual user as well as communities, because you know that, I mean, maybe you don't know personally, but alcohol consumption does lead to people becoming more reckless, often more aggressive. A lot of violent crime is actually caused by overconsumption of alcohol, and that's really not seen when people use marijuana at all. And so it just didn't make sense to me that, that adults over 21 were being punished for using marijuana, but not alcohol. So
it affects students. Well, first of all, it will still be illegal for students. The reality is, look, because I think there'll be other channels through which people can get a hold of the drug, I think it's much more likely that it'll be more readily available, but not legally, because all of the laws still would make it illegal under the age of 21. So how would it affect the students? They would still be left with the devices of attempting to obtain the marijuana illegally until they were of age at age 21.
For a long time before I started working here, I felt that our marijuana laws were completely unjust, particularly when marijuana is objectively safer than alcohol, which is promoted heavily in society and widely available. And when I started looking at all of the things associated with prohibition and all of the policy failures involved, I decided that I wanted to get involved directly, and it just happened to be when the MPP was hiring. Well, I think that the stigma associated with marijuana use is quickly starting to disappear as more and more people become comfortable sharing their experiences with the substance. I mean, there are over 27 million regular marijuana users in the United States, and over 100 million people in this country have tried it at least once. And now that the laws are starting to change and public opinion is starting to sway away from enforcing prohibition, people are more comfortable sharing their stories and their experiences about it. And I think that this has gone a long way towards getting rid of a lot of the false information. People are a little bit more critical of the information that they do hear nowadays, and it's no longer coming from just the governmental or law enforcement sources.
Alcohol is not legal for people under the age of 21, but we have a whole squad of it's probably a dozen officers whose full-time job, the only job they have, is to deal with underage drinking in Montgomery County. And it's going to be the same way if, if they legalize marijuana, you're still going to have underage use that's illegal. You're going to have underage sales that are illegal. So it's, somehow folks think if we legalize it that, oh, well, police don't have to worry about it anymore. I wish, but that's just not the case. So.
I think we're up against decades, really, of propaganda that has given out misleading information about marijuana. And so it's really just an educational process. But I think, especially within our generation, nobody takes for granted what they're told, and they like to do their own research. And so people are just recognizing more and more that it's been a waste of law enforcement resources to try and prosecute people for marijuana because it's not the gravest danger in society, and that these laws have been misapplied as far as racial disparity. I mean, especially in college where underage drinking is almost an accepted part of the culture, education around alcohol is a lot more focused on helping youth consume alcohol responsibly and knowing their limits, with the understanding that just saying no is not going to work, and it has never worked. And we're not encouraging the use of marijuana either, but with the understanding that people are using marijuana right now, even though it's illegal, even though everything we've been taught has told us to say no, we think that it is irresponsible to just continue telling youth, don't use it, without telling them what the actual effects of that substance is, whether it's marijuana or alcohol.
Now, we've crossed a threshold where more than 50% of people in the United States now favor some form of legalization or decriminalization of marijuana. There is something that's going to happen that I'm afraid of as a prosecutor and as a dad, and that is, I think that once you liberalize the accessibility of marijuana, what you're going to see an increase in that does pose a public safety danger is drugged driving. You're going to have more people operating motor vehicles while high. And as a result, I think we see carnage on our highways all the time as a result of alcohol and people driving while they've had too much to drink it. I think we're going to see a spiked increase in drugged driving, and in particular here, driving under the influence.
Because of the fair and even-handed portrayal by the media of this system that has been put in place in Colorado, a lot of other states have started looking at this and say, well, they can do it, the sky isn't falling, maybe we can too. We have strict age limits written into the law that are usually 21 and over for usage, and we try to make sure that people know that this is not going to make the substance more widely available for teens. If you go to any high school in this country, you can get marijuana in 5 minutes. The fact that we're taking it out of the hands of criminals who have no compunction to selling to people who are under 21 and putting it into the hands of legal businesses that do have incentives to check for ID is only going to help us prevent underage usage.
I think that if marijuana is legalized, even if it's just legalized for people age 21 and older, it is going to make it more readily available than it is now. And I know that there's some folks have no problem buying marijuana as much as they want, but there's a lot of folks that wouldn't know the first place to go. And by legalizing it, if you look at alcohol is so readily available to people under the age of 21 because it's sold legally, and there's so many different ways that they can get get alcohol if they want it. It would be the same situation with marijuana.
I mean, well, it does affect short-term memory. You wouldn't want to be studying for a test while you're under the influence. It definitely can affect motor skills, and so you shouldn't be driving while you're under the influence either. There are a lot of other stereotypical, well-known effects of marijuana, which aren't necessarily bad either. Like, it does make people dozy, which helps a lot of people fall asleep if they have difficulty sleeping. It does stimulate the appetite, which has helped a lot of medical patients whose medical conditions don't allow them to eat. And so even though there are these known stereotypes about marijuana, they can actually be benefits, even though they have been framed as negative things. You know, we're not saying that everyone should use marijuana, definitely not. But we think that if adults over 21 want to make that choice, you know, and knowing their own limits, then they should be able to.
Well, we've been all over the place with marijuana attitudes in the United States. The first big run-up of use and favorable attitudes toward it, because they go together, was in the early 1970s. So the marijuana use actually peaked among youth in 1978. And then there was a reaction to that, and marijuana use went down by 60% to 1991. And now it's back up about halfway to where it was when it was at the peak, but it's definitely rising now.
Things like that. So I do think that there are some medical consequences of liberalizing the accessibility to marijuana. Let me say, it's happening. Mm-hmm. Look, I think the reality is, do I believe that there will be either a legalization or a decriminalization of marijuana in the near future in Maryland? I think the answer to that is yes. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to happen this year. And the reason I don't think it's going to happen this year is an election year. I think it's a very tough thing for people politically to deal with this issue. They don't want to deal with this issue this year. Do I think maybe next year or the year after that we might see some movement on this issue? I think the answer is yes.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, marijuana use when you're a teenager is potentially detrimental to your brain development, so it's not a good idea to do it. However, that doesn't mean that you can't be involved in the political struggle to stop this unjust policy of prohibition. You know, these things affect teenagers as well as adults. You know, not necessarily drug use, but the effects that marijuana prohibition has on the community can have very detrimental effects on teens.
The fact is that it is nearly impossible, and probably it is impossible, for us to keep kids from, you know, using alcohol, trying, you know, drinking. It's just too readily available, and we know, the reality is we know that it happens. So I don't think that our experience with marijuana is going to be any different.
But you know, even the states that have marijuana be legal for adults, it's illegal for kids, just like alcohol and tobacco is. So all of that's fairly complex, but I think what's happening right now is there's a very strong movement sponsored by a lot of money, donors giving money for this, to emphasize that marijuana is relatively harmless and that people should be able to make their own decisions, a kind of libertarian view that, you know, it's your own body, you should do what you want to do with it. Now that's not specific to marijuana, that's an attitude about all kinds of drugs, but marijuana is the main drug where that is in the public mind right now. And so what you see is rapidly rising rates of marijuana use, especially in youth, but also in older populations.
Because right now, as a teenager, you can't just walk into a liquor store and say like, hey, can I get that 6-pack over there, right? But if you're a teenager looking for marijuana, you can walk up to any street dealer and say, hey, I would like, you know, a joint or whatever. Because the reality is drug dealers don't card, they don't ID, and that's a huge impediment for youth to be able to access these substances. Especially with cigarettes, they're very strict about making sure you are over 18 and they'll card you for that. And I'm 25 and I still get carded for alcohol all the time. But again, drug dealers don't card and they don't care who they sell to. And they might even want to be selling to youth because it's easier to persuade you at a young age to do these things, you know. So in a regulated market, we believe that it's actually controlling the marijuana better and putting a barrier between teen access to marijuana and the product itself. In all the research I've done, it's still not a good idea for young people to try this. You know, even though marijuana is safer than probably the propaganda you've heard, it's still not a good idea because it may affect young and developing brains, and you should stay in school and work hard. And when you're an adult, you can make that choice.